tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
This episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark is brought to you by Moriarty, available on Audible. There are some things that stay the same, that keep us feeling comfortable and cozy in our lives. A favorite food to eat when times are low, a song that cheers us when we're blue, or maybe just knowing that a hero triumphs over a villain, like how the great Sherlock Holmes manages to defeat his nemesis, Professor James Moriarty, over and over again. But, dear listener, as you know, listening to my show, one of the greatest horrors is when the world is turned upside down and nothing we know is the same. Take the above Sherlock Holmes, for example. What if our dear detective was, in fact, on the hunt for an innocent man? Don't miss the new Audible original, Moriarty, The Devil's Game. Bold new entry in the Sherlock Holmes universe. The story recasts Moriarty as a man framed for murder, on the run from both dark forces that seek to use his brilliance for its own ends, as well as Sherlock Holmes, Scotland Yard, and even the British Crown. As one genius matches wits against the other, the question then becomes, what must Moriarty do to clear his name, and what will he become in the process? Dominic Monaghan of The Lord of the Rings and Lost fame stars in the title role, and with a full cast including fellow Lord of the Rings alumnus Billy Boyd as Colonel Moran, Phil Lamar as Sherlock Holmes, and Lindsay Whistler as Rose Winslow, you're sure to be intrigued from the first moments. I know I was. Moriarty, The Devil's Game. It takes a villain to create one. I love it, and I know you will too. Learn more on Twitter at #MoriartyXAudible. Visit audible.com/listen to Moriarty and listen now. Good evening. You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 11, Episode 5. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 4 tales to terrify you, courtesy of author Dale Thompson. Tonight, our dear friend brings us tales regarding mysterious disappearances, unwanted visitors, weird trips, and heinous houseplants. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first 2 spine-tingling stories. If you'd like to show your support, and enjoy an extended version of this and other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show's about to begin. This episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark is brought to you by June's Journey. You know, not everything in life can be dark and devilish. I know every week I bring you stories to keep you up at night and give your nightmares a little extra vigor. But sometimes even my nightmares need a break, and I settle in and relax with a few scenes from June's Journey. June's Journey takes you back to the golden age of detective work, the Roaring Twenties, into a colorful, exciting world where amateur sleuth June begins by trying to solve the mystery of her sister's murder, but finds herself digging deeper and deeper into her family's many secrets. Each chapter presents a selection of hidden objects to locate, and if your sleuthing is good enough, you'll unlock new clues to discover. But that's not all. Each week brings a new chapter and new clues to find. You don't have to go it alone, though. No, you can even pit your skills with or against other detectives by joining a detective club, which offers chances to compete in leagues, if you think you're ready for it. Of course, if you're just in the mood for some light refreshment, there's always the ability to unlock features around your own personal island, creating your own little 1920s paradise. I'd show you mine, but that's one of the unfortunate side effects of audio. Yes, there's nothing quite like sending myself off to sleep, solving a nice mystery or two before going off to sleep, or if I can't get enough, cracking a few more when I wake up in the morning. Yes, friends, join me and the game 30 million fans and counting in the exciting adventure that's free to download. Find your inner detective. Download June's Journey today. Available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. There are some things in life that just seem out of place. Things that shouldn't happen. Things we just can't accept. A car in the neighborhood that just never moves. Or a house nobody ever walks by. Or in some cases, a friend who acts very out of character. A friend who would never do something unthinkable, or the aftermath unexplained. That last part is the story I will now be sharing with you, where a group goes to discover why their friend died, and in such a tragic manner, and what truths they dig up in the process. Without further ado, I present to you Island of the Dolls. No matter where I go, there's always a fright. Like an alcohol burn in my throat, like an acid that burns like hell. No matter where I run, I race into the cold iron bars of a closed prison gate. And then isolated, segregated, cocooned in a flesh-squeezing stickiness of anguish, which judges not yet carries out some sort of retribution woven into my own decomposition. The principles of my intellectual proportion slumbered in my intelligence. The angel of equilibrium sterilized the symptoms of my tyranny, petrified by fanatical devotion, disgraced in the presence of passionate ambivalence. Depredations woven into the fibers of my neglected being made me realize, as I stood at the point of death, I may be lying in my grave soon. These were my thoughts and life's conclusions once I realized that the island wanted my soul. On this adventure, the deeper unknown, unnamed, forbidden, sacred ground would be trampled in such blasphemous, unintended ways that a priest would toss his collar into the brazen altar of holy fire and be done with it. Those that refused to be open-hearted and honest and hold their pride and dignity in check would never see past the murky depths into the beauty of what was, is, and is to come. These were my thoughts and conclusions once I escaped the island. Suicide's an ugly word. There are many ugly words that people use on a daily basis. For example, the F-bomb, and some that are hardly used, like impermissible and prohibited words such as rape, ghetto, hate, the N-word, and all associated slang words. But for me, the word suicide is the word that contains the most tarnish and contention above them all. Suicide is when a person gives up, surrenders to their inner demons, and is devoured by something that, in all likelihood, if they had waited and maybe had a sleep, when they awoke the morning after those perilous thoughts, they might have just have been reconsidered. When an intelligent mind becomes ambiguous, it opens itself to equivocal scrutiny and problematic afterthoughts. This causes questionable thinking, irrational behavior, and impulsively drives that person to an enigmatic state of consciousness, melding in a disingenuous malady of ever-changing controversy, stirring emphatic empathy with a slow poison of nonsensical sterile conclusions. My good friend Atticus was a man addicted to travel. He was a man caught up in wanderlust. He was part hobo, part vagabond, part gypsy. Not a bum or a tramp. He worked and could work hard. I'd seen him outwork many a man. Atticus never stayed in one place very long. You never saw him languor or pull his own weight. If anything, all he did while in this world was to prove he had the stuff. The stuff? Not sure what the stuff is exactly, but if anybody had it, Atticus did, superlatively, and his life was paramount. What happened to Atticus was why we, a group of his friends, decided to investigate his purposed suicide ourselves. Something just didn't add up, and we could not let it rest until we got some answers. Atticus loved life. He loved everything about it. I've never seen a man so passionate about living with genuine joy every time he took a breath as Atticus. So when I received the news that he supposedly took his own life by hanging, my world stopped. The bottom dropped out, and I spiraled down into the bottom of a bottle for a good 3 days, maybe more than one bottle. When I came out of my drunken stupor and the effects of inebriation had melted from my brain, and my bloodstream was no longer intoxicated, I made many inquiries and rang many phones in an attempt to find out why his death was being called a suicide. Needless to say, when the evidence was shared, the revelation was simply unbelievable and absurd. He had reportedly been found by hunters in a very dark and dank place, hanging from a rope that had been looped and knotted around a tree limb. For locals, it evidently looked like an open and shut case, with the exception that this was not in his character to do. Even if there was an impending apocalypse on the horizon, Atticus was full of fight and integrity and would not have caved. He was the type of guy that would fight a rainbow in the most menacing thundercloud. His morality would oppose such thinking. His personality? never altered in all the years that I've known him, and his nature was invariably consistent. I'd known the man for 20 years. For as long as I'd known him and gotten to be one of his dearest friends, I never knew him to do anything radical other than his treks into the uncharted. As far as his character goes, he was emotionally stable, well-balanced, logical, reasonable, never irrational, thoughtful, giving, and not capable of such a heinous act, neither self-harm nor harm to others. Atticus was a man of peace, at peace with God, himself, and those around him. To be around Atticus was to enter a realm of calm. He seemed to exude such a radiance. His life was adaptable, and he harmonized with whatever surrounding he was in. He was never argumentative or combative. His catchphrase in any dispute was, "You may be right." My name is Morton. My friends included Ramsey, who was actually in love with Atticus at the time of his disappearance, Percival, who'd been a childhood friend of both Atticus and me, and Linus, who joined our little circle about 2 years prior to Atticus's untimely death. An oddity that troubled me from the day I received that dreadful phone call informing me that my childhood friend was dead was that Atticus' body was not returned to his family. I have, for these past 2 weeks, been highly suspicious and therefore motivated to set in my resolve to get to the heart of the matter. What failed to add up for me is that Atticus was identified by his driver's license alone and quickly buried there in the channels of Xochimilco, south of the center of Mexico City. The four of us made our way to Mexico City by car. This drive took 17 hours. To make good time, we took turns, stopping very little. We booked ourselves into a Radisson hotel, got a few hours of sleep. Then our trip continued on the light rail train called 39, Tren Ligero 39, until we reached Xochimilco, rightly called by the Venice of Mexico. The only accessible way to get to the island of the Dolls was by boat. We arrived at the embarcaderos, or docks, to the celebrated sounds of mariachi music. We were in one of the boroughs, now south of Mexico City, and made our way to the Embarcadero Suimanco's entrance, which we were advised to do prior to our trip. Colorful boats lined the pier like preparing for a festival parade. There we met with our prearranged boat guide, who spoke English, Jose Sanchez. We didn't have to negotiate a price with the local boatkeeper, like the tourists were doing. We did our homework before the trip, and actually had permission from the Mexican government to visit the island, and to visit the site where Atticus was presumed to have taken his own life. We had told the Mexican authorities that we were there to pay our respects, and said nothing of our suspicions. Jose's colorful gondola-style boat, called a Tajaneras, was very comfortable and seated about 20 people. Subsequently, our group was the only one taking it, and we were happy to stretch out and relax. On the still, dank, shallow waters, we floated along through the canal, viewing many chinampas, which were man-made islands, named floating gardens, held together by the roots of trees. Navigating ever so slowly through the minefield of reeds, we moved along under the perennial willow trees, also known as ahujote, which looked like a beaten guardians of this foreboding place. Flowering water lilies seemed to have sprung up everywhere. The lilies shared the wetlands with the thorny ornamental vines, the bougainvilleas, the dicotyledonous dahlias, and the rare sight was a Japanese bonsai tree. These islands reminded me of the floating markets of Thailand, where I'd spent some weeks. There were many floating restaurants and bars along the way, and we did indulge in the conveniences of a drink and food at a certain point. When we saw a wall of bamboo and doll heads peeking over and through the bamboo, We knew we had arrived. The boat ride from Embarcadero to Isla de la Muñeca seemed much shorter than we initially thought it would be. We all enjoyed the ride, feeling guilty, though, because we were here to investigate the death of our dear friend, not to holiday. The boat ride was so pleasant that the shock of the island mortified us from the start. When we arrived, there was no one to meet us. The main entrance was blocked, and a sign read, "Closed." I volunteered to go ashore, and once on dry land, I banged on the bamboo gate. I waited, and there was no response. Then I shook it violently. I'd not traveled this far to be turned away. I shouted a couple of times, "Is anyone here?" I looked back at my friends who sat in the boat watching with Jose. They shrugged their shoulders in disappointment. I rattled the gate one more time, then turned to walk away when I heard a voice. "Compadre!" I turned to see the gate open. The man's voice said in broken English, "I was expecting you." I assumed the Mexican authorities had called ahead and that we were on the schedule as guests. I signaled to the others to come ashore and to follow me. I heard Jose say something, but I dismissed it. My anticipation drew me in through the bamboo gate. Whatever Jose wanted could wait. I'd paid him handsomely to wait for us until we returned from our investigation. Once through the gates, I did not see whoever allowed us to enter. There was no one within my field of vision. I figured they'd gone ahead and were waiting for us further in. Finally, I put the voice that invited us into this minatory place to a face. A little Mexican man appeared, all smiles and a prominent mustache. He introduced himself as Don. I assumed, since the island was closed, that he was waiting for us as a VIP party, and that he was why we were allowed to enter the island. We'd walked a short piece, taking in the sights and the creepiness, when Don informed us he was the caretaker, and his full name was Don Julian Santana Barrera. I thought that was certainly an impressive name. I assumed he was a man who invited us through the gate. At the time, the name meant nothing to me. He spoke broken English and said he was most happy to guide us to the place where the authorities claimed they'd found Atticus. I took a good look around as my friends joined me. The trees were littered with sun-faded dolls, these malformed pieces of rubber and plastic, some with gouged out eyes and severed limbs, others busted up and fragmented, were strung along our path as far as the eye could see. It gave us the creeps. Most were hanging from their necks, dangling from limbs and branches, swaying in the gentle breeze. Some looked tortured, faces pained, weather-worn, and grim. Many, whose glaring eyes looked as though they were staring at us, while others stared in one direction into the void. The bulbous-headed dolls with their thin protruding arms were grotesque, like deformed, hopeless circus freaks. Dismembered suspension of their resemblance of death was everywhere. The decrepit dolls were zombified, hoisted up in eerie display. The sight was quite disturbing and forlorn. Forsaken, sullen faces lost to spectacle on a morose, lonesome land. I've never been witness to inanimate objects so downcast, rocking tunelessly out of rhythm with one another. Naked female dolls were held in the air like aerial performers by matted hair. Our volunteer guide, Don, led us to an ominous, cobweb-laced shanty of a hut, and inside we found more disturbing, unmanaged dolls. They were frightening clown dolls with their fire-red and orangey wispy hair, which seemed to be jutting off their scalps. These vulgar, dour dolls were strapped to the walls as if being punished or kept prisoner. Maybe these restraints were necessary? Now my mind was playing tricks on me. The dolls had been collected from trash that Don had rummaged through, and he said he had found many floating like bloated corpses in a river. I was feeling very uneasy, and so were my friends. There was a vibe like a transgression of unforgivable proportions that had been committed here, and no one would hear the confession and give penance. They were tattered and torn remnants of children's playthings, and they were everywhere. It was so easy to be dissuaded, but we remained unremitting, persistent in our investigation. We meant to probe and prod, turn over every stone, or, in this case, look into the face of every doll fettered here, until we arrived at the truth. These were the outcast, the forgotten dolls, once a plaything to bring a smile to a child's face, now wriggling, perched, and fastened like convicted criminals on public display. Looking up at the ceiling, there were dozens of dreary dolls peering down upon us, their wretchedness almost mournful. I got the sensation of life and death all knotted together and had a difficult time untangling the meaning. After all, these were only dolls. Over against the far wall, a special shrine had been erected for one exceptional doll. There was nothing much different about the doll except its size was quite a bit larger than the hanging dolls. This doll was seated on a makeshift shrine. A curved wooden banner had been constructed over its head, with the letters in paint XOCHIMILCO. Near it was a bowl full of coins, candy, and flowers, in which one could pay tribute and give offerings to this one doll on the island if they chose to do so. Ramsay articulated, "I'm already spooked." I agreed. I was somewhat taken aback by the sheer volume of the unusual and fantastical. I found everything begrimed, filthy, and sordid. I dared not touch a single thing for my own safety. There was a strong sense of impurity, whorishness, and inappropriate exhibition, as if something ill was attached, clinging like a malignant, deplorable, unseen curse upon every affixed figurine. I've never seen so many different types of dolls in my life. This was a plaganologist's dream. There were the rubbery, thin-skinned dolls called magic skin dolls that darkened over time, broken porcelain dolls, hard plastic dolls, articulated body dolls, bonnet-headed dolls, rag dolls, which the Mexicans called Marias, and many other kinds. Our guide Don adumbrated and pointed to the doll seated in the makeshift shrine. Through his thick mustache, he informed us that her name was Augustinita. She was the only doll on the island that had been given a name. She was found on the 28th day of August, the date of St. Augustine. She was left as the lucky doll, or miracle doll, but Don said, "She is anything but that." "Bad luck," he exclaimed oddly. He muttered under his breath, "El mal de ojo," meaning evil eye, and el ojo de venado, meaning deer's eye. Unexpectedly, he reached into his pocket and withdrew 4 red string bracelets with light brown colored beans sewed into them. "You wear these. Protection. Deer's eye. She is no good spirit. I've taken her off the island, but she returns." "Are you saying the doll is alive?" Ramsay asked. "Not alive. Possessed. Paranormal," Don answered, moving toward the exit, as if he had said too much. A heavy dark presence followed us from the hut. We all acknowledged it. The decay that we first tasted when we came ashore seemed to have grown in an ever-present ambiance. This was severely unnerving. The ghoulish playground of mutilated dolls was, for me, a cemetery on an ancient Aztec waterway. We did not argue. We all slipped the bracelets on our wrists and we pressed on. Don then shared that he had never had children of his own. "These are my children." We exited the hut and returned to the boardwalk, which led around to the back of the building. There were no surprises there, much of the same. Demented doll heads with smeared paint across their lifeless eyes on spearheads. A line of barbed wire was strung from one tree to the next, and maniacal dolls were tethered to the wire. Every macabre sort of debauchery and disarray, expression of vile desecration was on display. We had dug our heads at one point because the galling dolls were strung low on the footpath. Ramsay stayed close to me, I suppose because I was more athletic than either Linus or Percival, though Linus could pull some crazy faces when angered. Has anyone else felt that creepy chill in the air? Ramsay asked. It sort of gets into your bones, I answered. I feel some sort of tormenting spirit here. I'm not superstitious, nor do I believe in all that hocus-pocus nonsense, but I can tell you my hair is standing on end. Percival expounded. Yeah, one of those dolls in the hut was watching me, I swear. Linus blurted out. I shushed him because I didn't want to offend Don, who had been a gracious host so far. Keep it down. Let's just get to the tree where they said Atticus died. I reminded our group. I did have an uneasy feeling that maybe, and I know this sounds odd, that maybe these dolls were captive. Every stuffed and hollow plaything looked as if no child had ever held them, played with them, or called them their favorites. Maybe these were the throwaways, the mistreated? Or maybe I was reading way too much into something that wasn't real. I swear there was a ghostly presence that had joined us. An unseen, mystical entity that could be malicious, but we didn't know at that point. If these dolls were in fact slaves, then there had to be manifested slave masters. This hypothesis gave me goosebumps and an alien chill. Through more ghastly scenes of contortion and disquieting absurdities, we followed Don to a tree where he abruptly stopped. This is the tree that you're looking for, he informed us. The trunk of the tree and its base were covered with a large pile of scattered cempasúchil flowers, as marigolds were typically placed on Mexican graves. A sense of extreme reverence washed over me, and I could see the faces of my friends become even more somber. Do you remember our friend? Did you see him? I asked in hopes that Don would have some memory of Atticus's visit. Don looked up with his teary eyes and expressed, Yes, I remember your friend. I almost didn't expect this answer. I immediately asked, Can you tell us what happened? Who found his body? Baneful and enervated, Don smiled. His body was never found. His answer floored us. My knees weakened and my torpor head, dizzy, almost could not process what I'd heard come out of his mouth. A sickness swelled in my throat, and I swallowed hard to force the malady back into my gut. What do you mean they never found his body? We were informed that he died by suicide, Percival inquired emotionally. The island took him. He was lost in the otherness, Don answered, then stared down at the ground. The four of us made uncomfortable but confirming eye contact. What is the otherness? Percival mumbled. With an impotent chagrin, Don's voice sounded ossified and suddenly as ancient as this site. Anyone that stays too long here, the island takes, and they become what we all are. How does the island take people? You mean Atticus is here? I felt my voice strain. Yes, he is here. He is everywhere. Don leered back up at me. His eyes had seemed to blacken, and I saw no life in them. Concerned that all of my suspicions were ringing true, I positioned myself between Don and my friends. But you live here. Why hasn't the island taken you? Ramsay wanted straight answers, as we all did. None of this was making sense. Don paused and stunned us with two words. It has. My senses reeled. Impending doom filled each of us, and the cold hand of the grave brushed us just enough to say that it was among us. We want answers. You must tell us what happened to our friend." Ramsay felt heartsick and spoke with righteous conviction. Don was not looking well. Something inexplicable and anomalous was happening, so outlandish that there was no way to properly describe what we saw. His appearance began to metamorphose. Dark, mossy clusters formed on his arms and face, and his face began to drop as if he was having a stroke. His hair was changing into some sort of organic matter. We four began to back away. Don spoke with a hellish tone. His voice was otherworldly, practically demoniacal in vehemence. "The island desires dolls. It must be appeased." It was at that split second, that frozen instant in time, when out of the corner of my eyes I swore I saw a doll, pinned to the tree that was the exact caricature of what Atticus would look like if his image had been transformed into a doll. How I wish now that we had time to truly take a closer look, but we concurred that it was no longer safe for us to remain there. I experienced a panic like a murderous, damnable taunt. Don lifted his hands into the air as the scornful mouthpiece of something gray and dejected. He voiced in an odd accent and a deeper tone, "Stay too long and it takes us all in the end. I am a collector. I collect dolls." Don said as he continued through his bizarre physical change. The wind picked up tremendously, and every malevolent doll began to shake, shuffle, and rattle. They were swaying violently, struggling against their restraints. I vapidly prayed in expiation, not knowing if my life was moments away from being vanquished. Upset and disconcerted, we darted for the courtyard of ancient things. We were not sticking around to see what mysteries the transmuted dawn was going to share next. We wanted to be estranged from this place as far away and as quickly as humanly possible. The freakish weather was tropical, with strong winds and now the spitting of rain. We ran as if our life depended on it. Suddenly the sky opened up on us and pelted us with hail as if to say, "Get off my island." In sheer terror, we ran and we never looked back. Sad to say, but we momentarily dismissed why we were here, as our priority became how to save ourselves from the unknown. A nameless monster must have been pursuing us. Clumsily, our legs pumped out of sync, fueled by adrenaline and the release of endorphins that threw us into flight. I'd always thought of myself as one that would fight, but in this case, I turned my back and skedaddled. Sprinting in retreat Olympic style, I think we all made it in record time. I could not be sure if we were being pursued because I never looked back once I started the escape. Instinctually, we made our way back to the dock, somewhat relieved and thankful for the preservation. This episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark is brought to you by Moriarty, available on Audible. I know you tune into me weekly to hear a nice, unsettling tale or two, but let me tell you what I'm currently listening to. Right now, there's a familiar tale being retold that will turn one of literature's most famous rivalries on its head. Imagine, if you will, that you open up your favorite book and instead of the story you expect, the villain is no longer the villain, but an innocent man framed for a crime he did not commit, which colors the way you view him forever. Such has happened in Audible's newest original production, Moriarty, the Devil's Game. In a world where Professor James Moriarty is framed for a murder he didn't commit, he finds himself pursued by forces he cannot understand, as well as by the familiar faces of Sherlock Holmes, Lestrade, and his forces in Scotland Yard, even the British Crown itself. Starring Dominic Monaghan from Lord of the Rings and Lost as the Professor himself, his full-cast audio production is chock full of thrills as two geniuses pit their wits against each other, and as the noose tightens, the question will be asked, How far will one go to clear their own name? Moriarty, the Devil's Game. It takes a villain to create one. I love it, and I know you will too. Learn more on Twitter at #MoriartyXAudible. Visit audible.com/listen to Moriarty and listen now. We prayed that the boat had stayed and that we could make our exodus from this hideous place. We were brimming with excitement at the sight of the boat. Jose Sanchez was waving his arms frantically for us to run to him. In my peripheral vision, I would have sworn that the cacodemonic dolls were moving on their own, blinking their eyes and moving what limbs were still attached. The four of us hit the boat in full stride, and Jose shoved off with a long pole that he used for navigation. We were not making a speedy getaway for sure. We only wanted to distance ourselves from the freaky madness we had just experienced. Jose asked, "Did you see? Did you see?" "See what?" I asked, completely out of breath. "Did you see the ghost of Don Julian Santana Barrera?" "Ghost? Ghost? You knew this place had ghosts?" Linus asked, highly agitated. "I've never seen," Jose confessed, still pushing the boat away from the island. I'd not put two and two together. When we first met Don Julian Santana Barrera, I knew his name sounded familiar, but I thought it may have been just a common Mexican name in general and paid it no mind. He'd introduced himself as Don, but was actually known as Santana. We were calling him Don, and he never corrected us. This was 2022. Jose informed us that Don Julian Santana had died on the island in 2001, in the same spot where he tried to rescue a little girl that died on the island 50 years previously. We never, ever found out what exactly happened to our dear friend Atticus. We were doleful, not knowing how he spent his final days and hours. One thing we were certain of is that he did not take his own life. And in some phantasmagorical weirdness, he was now and would remain a fixture, forever a part of the Island of the Dolls. I hope you enjoyed Island of the Dolls by Dale Thompson, as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented feature author, you can help support them by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Thompson. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/THOMPSON. You may be more familiar with Dale through his music than his writing. Find out more about his work through the Dale Thompson YouTube channel, with samples of his albums and the occasional outtake or two of his 45-year career. If you do decide to stop by the profile, please leave Dale a kind word and let him know you heard about him here on this show, and that Otis Jiry sent you. It would mean a lot to me. Thanks again for your support of this program and of tonight's featured author. Pro tip for you adventurers out there. When you come across an island covered in dolls, with only one visible inhabitant, just assume the place is haunted. And if it's not, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Coming to terms with someone else's life is hard enough to understand. But what about reflecting upon your own? Our next story deals with an accountant by the name of Aldous, a fellow who prides himself on his work and very little else. Seems to him his work is everything, and an interruption cannot be tolerated, not even for a strange fellow who refuses to take no for an answer. Without further ado, I present to you Appointment with Death. Aldous Wolfe was a man of means. He was a doer, and never procrastinated at anything. If he was supposed to do something, you could depend on him to do it. He prized his job as an accountant. He always loved numbers because numbers do not lie. One could say he was married to his job and had little time for friends, relatives, or nonsense. He was focused, mainly serious, and had little to no sense of humor. He lived by logic more than common sense, and what you saw is what you got. On this busy day in the office, which happened to be at the end of the month, Aldous was busy creating the company's financial reports for the quarter. His focus was undeterred, and he was mindful of every detail. Everyone understood that he was in the zone and would not want to be disturbed under any circumstances. The fact that he was alone, was in charge of the analysis of the company's profits, equity, and cash flow, made him an invaluable member of staff. Aldous held degrees in accounting, business studies, economics, and even management, but he had no real desire to go into the upper tier, because in that echelon of hierarchy, if one ever fell from grace, it was a long way to fall and unrecoverable. So he preferred being valued as lower staff, and it did not dent his ego in the least. Buried in paperwork and zero computer software, his eyes seemed to be saccades as he scoured the data with monocular vision. He stopped, abruptly feeling the stroke of a cold zephyr on the nape of his neck. Losing focus, he broke away from his concentration to feel the back of his head and neck, and he strained to look around to see if someone was behind him, or if a window had been carelessly left open by the cleaning crew the night before. All seemed secure, and there was nowhere that this rogue draft could have come from, except the air vents. Not wanting to pursue the matter, he refocused on his calculations, charts, and graphs. A knock came at his door. "Mr. Wolf, there's someone here to see you," the young female intern interrupted. The look on Aldous' face was priceless. It was one of dismay and, "How dare you?" stamped across his frown. "What?" He tried to interpret the silence. "A man is out front in the lobby asking for you," the intern timidly informed him. "Asking for me? Peculiar. I'm very busy. If this is not a matter of life or death, I've things to do and can't be distracted right now. Can you find out who he might be? What does he want? And if this has nothing to do with accounting, then why did he come during office hours?" Aldous turned his head from the intern as if she was no longer standing there, and he went about his calculations, putting the matter out of his head. A short time later, the intern returned. She reluctantly knocked on his door again, and with a stall and hesitation in her tone, interrupted Aldous and his work for the second time. "What is it now? Can't you see I have a deadline? Time is of the essence." He was almost flamboyant in his delivery, not meaning to be comical. However, the intern did find humor in his response and suppressed a giggle. "The man is still waiting in the lobby." She looked down at a notepad which she held in the palm of her hand. "His name is Letifer Mortem, and he claims he has an appointment with you, but he can wait." She read straight from the pad without making eye contact. "I've never heard of such a man, and as far as an appointment, I have none," Aldous quacked. He went into his email calendar and checked today's date. "He's terribly mistaken. Tell him to go away. I cannot be bothered," Aldous frustratedly ordered. The intern simply obliged and left his presence. Aldous was in the heart of the balance sheet when, again, an icy brush grazed the scruff of his neck. This time it was so cold that he practically jumped from his chair. He grabbed the back of his neck and rubbed it feverishly, now thinking that he had sat so long hunched over his computer, glued to the screen, that the nerves in the back of his neck had become inflamed and aggravated. Yes, that had to be it. He convinced himself that he needed to sit up taller and stretch his spinal cord. He'd read all of the safety notices the company had released on posture at the workstation, and he felt embarrassed that he had obviously not been following them. He repositioned his body in the chair and sat erect, unnaturally tall, feeling the strain on his back under his shoulder blades. This posture did not feel good. It strained his neck awkwardly, but knowing this was best for his neck and spine, according to company recommendations, he followed the guidelines. Now, that's better, he convinced himself, hoping for no more interruptions. This report was vital, and he was being pushed to produce it and ready a presentation by the end of the working day. He only needed to prepare it so the higher-ups could take a draft home and know what was in the presentation for tomorrow's delivery. A voice cut through his spine like a knife to the bone. It was that rude intern again, who obviously had dementia. That gentleman, letter from Mortem, is strongly insisting that he has an appointment with you, and he said he could not leave until he gathered you. Could not leave or would not leave? What does he mean, gather me? Is he a foreigner? Aldous turned hot in the face and was visibly incensed. These interruptions were inexcusable. I'm unsure of his ethnicity, but the word he used was could not. In a sarcastic, deliberate, heightened tenor, and with hand gestures as if to indicate that the intern was not doing her job properly, he asked, "Can you please find out what this is concerning? The subject matter. What does this issue of such great importance fall under? Get to the gist of his purpose and make sure it's clear." The intern twisted and turned as ballet dancers would do in Swan Lake and disappeared down the hallway. By this juncture of the afternoon, Aldous could be seen and heard mumbling to himself. He was showing signs of distress. His irritation had been stoked to exasperation. Feeling molested by these soul-destroying obtrusions, he soldiered on with his analysis. He was growing parched and realized he had not taken a break all day. His dedication was not always healthy, but he was known for working from early mornings into the night. On several occasions, he had to be reminded that he'd missed lunch or that working hours had ended. Aldous was not the sort of man to leave loose ends, and because of all of that allegiance to the company and personal commitment to excellence, he was driven quintessentially to impeccability in every aspect of his job. He always brought a thermos of strong coffee to work, and although it was a good one, keeping his coffee hot through the morning, by this time, the afternoon, he assumed the coffee would be lukewarm. He indulged any way to find it, pleasantly hot, and the aroma of the Brazilian brew was exactly what he had needed. Regrettably, his mind was jumping frames from his work, which was vitally important to this mystery man, whom he assumed was still waiting for him. He thought to himself, I do not have time for this nonsense. If that idiot wants to sit out there hell-bent on meeting me, it'll just have to be after work. There's nothing he could possibly be here for that's more important than my end of the fiscal year report. Such a dastardly thing to do to a man at work. Come unannounced, bother him at every minute upon minute, and this is the busiest time of the year. How impudent. Such discourteous behavior should not be rewarded. This audacious fellow with his ill-mannered behavior will have to carry on with his cheeky enigma until I'm finished and good and ready to entertain him. Several minutes passed by, and Aldous assumed he was rid of the man, the intrusions and the interference with his work. This was not to be. A different intern appeared in his doorway. It seemed the female intern had become thusly intimidated by Mr. Wolfe, and that she was too frightened to return with any more messages or news from the stranger, letter from Mortem, who'd come to call and was patiently waiting in the lobby. "Sir, I have a note from the man waiting to see you," said the young dark-haired male intern. "What? What happened to the girl? You know, the other one?" asked Aldous, looking perplexed as ever. She went home sick, was the answer, as the young man reached out to hand Aldous the note, but Aldous did not take it from him. Leave it on the corner of my desk, and please, unless this building is burning to the ground, please do not come back. With a thoughtless lack of concern for the new messenger person, Aldous sounded angry and vulgar with deliberate intent. The messenger left the note and departed the room without a valediction. Aldous looked at the note with his arthropodic gifted eye as he studied the computer screen at the same time. Then both eyes went to the folded note. Should I open it now? Should I even care what it says? Because if he's a salesman and has tormented me all day over something I would never have considered buying, I swear. Aldous came short of swearing. He picked it up, fumbled almost nervously to open it, which was his normal manner, and read the message. Memento vivere. Memento vivere? Aldous, who knew no Latin, repeated the word slowly out loud. Memento vivere. And what the devil's that mean? Judas Priest. Why a cryptic message? Aldous immediately went to the internet, and there he found the definition of this abstract phrase. He read it with his lips, but no sound came from his mouth. Know that your time is short in the grand scheme. This got his attention. He perked up in his mathematical mind. He went through 100 scenarios as to what this could possibly mean. Then a light came on inside his head, and he thought he had an answer. Selling funeral insurance, I bet. This joker's an insurance salesman. Piece of crap. Aldous pushed an extension on his phone to ring the intern station. He wasn't sure who answered, if it was the same male intern who had brought him the note or not. Fuming now, Aldous ordered the intern to retrieve a business card from the man waiting for him in the lobby and to bring it to him immediately. He assumed once he did this, the man would realize that he had been found out and hopefully remove himself from the premises. No one in their right mind would want to entertain an insurance agent during working hours. Grumbling to himself, he called the man coffin-making buffoon. Aldous muttered the words jackleg, undertaker agent, and went back to work. He was now under the gun to complete his work by the end of the working day. However, he had enough accomplished, even with the moments of interruption, that he managed to pull together a satisfactory presentation for the next day. He'd already made up his mind to stay later, so he could put it all together in a neat package for the higher-ups to review. He would hand them a more thorough and extensive report first thing in the morning. He didn't have plans for the evening, so he committed himself to remain late. He would probably order pizza for dinner to be delivered to the office. Then he would have the luxury of alone time he needed to wrap everything up nicely for everyone and would be out of the office by 8 p.m. The intern had returned with something in his hand. It was not a business card. It was, in fact, another piece of paper. This time, Aldous snatched it from the young intern's hand, as if he was taking a speeding ticket from a police officer. It was another note with a handwritten Latin phrase. More specificae mea est anima tua. Wait here, he ordered the intern who had already begun his escape. He stopped in his tracks. Aldous went to the internet again and searched the Latin phrase. He again read the definitions out loud. Death is peaceful. Mine is yours. Aldous took great offense at this joke. There was nothing funny about it at all. It was unprofessional. What sort of insurance agent would go to the macabre to sell insurance? Well, here's some Latin for you, you feign. Aldous searched up a phrase in Latin from the internet and wrote as infernum on a slip of paper and added a smiley face beneath it. That'll give him my answer. Go to hell. Aldous handed the note to the intern and chuckled for the first time today. Fire with fire, I say, boy. he added audibly as the intern exited to deliver the message to letter for mortem. The last couple of hours passed by without further discontinuance of his work. When 5 p.m. rolled around, the staff exited the building, leaving Aldous alone in his tranquil serenity to make love to numbers and romance the data. What a relief to be alone and free and capable of making the report flawless in every degree. First things first, I must order food. He knew what he wanted. Pizza was his go-to comfort food, and food to think by. Even when pizza became cold, it was still delicious to him. He practically salivated thinking about that wonderful tomato paste and the extra cheese he'd have added to it. He was by no means a vegetarian. As a matter of fact, he never met a vegan he respected. Yet it was the vegetarian pizzas he found most favorable. The last meal of the day, he amused himself by singing it to the tune of Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. A cold chill slapped him in the nape of the neck like a frozen hand, and the room became glacial. Immediately he thought those dummies turned on the air conditioning instead of turning on the heat when they left. Then a voice was heard. A baritone, guttural voice that rumbled when it spoke, emphasizing each syllable like the sound of hard water over rocks. "Now, will you see me, Aldous Wolf?" Aldous spun around, surprised, frightened, and trembling. There stood a tall, thin man in a black suit with a black tie, with coal black hair and piercing black eyes, which showed no lights of pupils. Aldous fought for the courage to respond. "What are you doing here? Everyone has left for the day." Aldous stated the obvious. He knew right away who this man was, staring him dead in the eye. It was a letter for mortem. "I'm not buying any insurance. I thought I made that clear in my last note." Aldous was feeling a bit more confident than when he received the initial fright. Letter for mortem spoke again with the same commanding voice which rattled Aldous' eardrums. "I have not waited for you all day because I have something to sell you. I'm giving you something. You have an appointment, Mr. Wolf. That appointment is now. Mors certa ora incerta." "Wait, you're not an insurance salesman?" Aldous could still not wrap his mind around what he was being told. "Stop with the Latin. Who speaks Latin? What do you want?" Aldous demanded to know. "I am testificans aducat mortem. I've come for you and have been patient in waiting for you. Not everyone receives such privilege to prepare for such a momentous event." Letter for mortem drew closer to Aldous, and Aldous slowly backed up. "Are you here to kill me? I'll fight you." Aldous, who was no fighter, postured himself awkwardly in some freestyle defensive pose, hoping to intimidate this would-be murderer. "I kill no one, Mr. Wolf. I escort the living through the veil. I am, in fact, a protector, a custodian of souls. I safeguard a peaceful transition of energy and light." "I'm not going anywhere with you, lunatic. You hang out here all day waiting for everyone to leave, and then you come in like some ghoul? You're a maniac. I'm not interested in what you're selling. Take your snake oil somewhere else." Aldous was steaming with rage. "I must insist that you do not make this unpleasant. You must make an appearance to other higher worlds. Venipessum. Come with peace, Mr. Wolf." Letter for mortem welcomed him, holding out his hand. "You're leaving, Mr. Mortem, and I'm going to order a pizza. Then I'm going to eat it and prepare the rest of my report for presentation," Aldous said with certainty. Letter for mortem stood motionless, as if he was thinking. "I know leaving before one has properly prepared is regrettable. Some leave of their own accord, at peace. Some leave unexpectedly, but manage to walk through the veil of their own accord. Please, Mr. Wolf, Do not be the one that must be pushed. It's a long fall into the vastness, and the unknown is very black. I'll have you know this report is the most important thing in my life at the moment, and your presence is preventing me from completing it. Now, if you would kindly leave, so I can have this prepared by morning." Aldous' voice quivered as the realization of his grim predicament sank in. "My dear Mr. Wolf, you will not be here tomorrow. You are leaving because I cannot leave without you, and you cannot prevent me from leaving. From now on, where I go, you will follow." Aldous attempted to leave by the door, but in a display of phantasmagoria violence, the door slammed shut. Aldous froze in his steps at the unbelievable bang of the door. He knew better than to try the doorknob. Turning toward Letterford and understanding that this was a dire situation, he pleaded, "Not now. I'm not even 50. I have so much to do. Can't I have longer?" "Longer? Longer for what, Mr. Wolf? You have no friends, no family, no dreams, no desires outside of this office. And if you were honest with yourself, you'd admit with all certainty that you're miserable. Your diet is unhealthy, your hours of sleep are poor. You dream of numbers, and your nightmares are some of the blackest I have ever known. You've taken a life that was given to you and mired it in the mundane, the earthly. In the carnal days of your life have found no happiness. You've never known love because you were never given love, and this love that has escaped you was partially your own misfortune. You're being given a gift, Mr. Wolf." Letterford approached and sat near to him. Aldous lowered his head because it was all true. As a matter of fact, he knew he had never been happy. He was the man, Bernardo Soares, from Fernando Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet. Whereas in Pessoa's sad tale, his character ignored life by losing himself in literature, Aldous ignored life by losing himself in numbers. He now understood that his entire life had been met with internal pain, and he could never escape it. It haunted him in the night, and sat beside him in sunlight like some old tired friend on a park bench who only moans about the cares of life. He'd never appreciated living. If he were to be challenged to define living, he'd be unable to find the words. His life was everything he failed to be, just like Bernardo Soares. How could he have squandered life and traded happiness for an office, consumed by numbers? Now he saw it. He did not spit out the numbers. They were spitting him out with every calculation. And numbers do not lie. So his entire life, everything that was making him non-existent, was the truth trying to be told. Life had indeed found him, but he had not been ready, so his was an existence in the shadow of everything successful. His work made others, and while he was building their ivory towers, he worked in the digital dust and the suffering labor of software. He saw now that physically he'd never worked a hard day in his life, except the day his kitchen sink sprung a leak underneath the cabinet, and he spent 8 hours repairing it while following instructions from a video on the internet. His laborious life was sticking moduli stacks when fine moduli spaces did not exist. But whoever used algebra anyways? You see, Mr. Wolf, life carries on without you. Nothing will change in your absence. There will be no butterfly effect of your non-existence. You, however, cannot carry on because you have no life. You have spent your days preparing to exist and never did. You're simply being called home. It's not so much unseen, unheard, and unknown, as it's being known by the one who's the creator of all things. Now won't you join me in departing with dignity? Aldous was perplexed. Yet his reasoning seemed to help him come to terms as his eyes welled with tears. These were tears he had never known. The capitulating sorrow was not loss or even pity. These were tears of release. These were the inward yearnings and achings of a man who'd just woken up. He was being born again. He had no impulse to bargain. "Is it painful?" Aldous asked, looking up with swollen eyes of misty red. "Paradise is never painful, Mr. Wolf." "How does it happen?" Aldous asked with trepidation as his voice cracked. "Like I said earlier, you can step through the veil on your own, or I can guide you in. Everyone is different. Are you ready?" "I think I'd like to go it on my own." "What should I expect?" "Because I am merely a chaperone, I've never experienced it. But I'm told it is peace, rest, and not a place or a time, but rather an existence beyond which man can think or imagine. No mortal restrictions, no fleshy ills, no uncertainties, for the price has been paid in blood. There is no more blood to spill, no more tears, no more death. This step is a new identity, where what you were designed to be is realized and fulfilled, and all former things with the negativity and bad memories are no longer remembered. No deadlines. Life for the first time." Aldous Wolf's body was found the next morning by his team. He was slumped over his desk, his head gently laying against the keys of his laptop. His face was serene, as if he was having the most wonderful dream, but he was no longer breathing. Those that found him were emotionally moved by finding him. Also found was his completed presentation of the annual report, which, when produced annually thereafter, would be known as the Aldous Wolf Report. I hope you enjoyed Appointment with Death by Dale Thompson, as performed by yours truly. If you've enjoyed what you've heard tonight, I'd like to remind you one last time that tonight's featured author can be found by visiting our website. Just visit simplyscarypodcast.com/Thompson. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/THOMPSON. Remember to see his official YouTube channel for more from him, but if you can't wait to hear more stories from him, be sure to check back through the archives to Season 10, Episode 23, where my dulcet tones narrate a few more items to help haunt your dreams. As a reminder, if you decide to give tonight's talented authors stories to read, please consider leaving them a quality review and a kind word, or a thoughtful public comment and an upvote. Be sure to let them know you heard about them on this program and that me, Otis Jiry, sent you. It means more to me than you can imagine, and I'm pretty sure Dale would very much appreciate it as well. Thanks again for your support of this show and of tonight's featured author. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me on this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you've enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcast and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference, and it would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other episodes featuring twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingdalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well, at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Storytime, dating back to 2014. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky, get some sleep, if you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted, and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's otis@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.